Okay, let's see. Is this working now? All right, I guess this is working now. Finally? Question mark? Okay. Well, that was weird. Had some real technical difficulties there. But we will persevere nonetheless. Let's try this again. Hello to my fellow instrumentalists who have already subscribed to the channel. And hi to the rest of you who haven't yet. We no longer have a thumbnail, but at least we have audio, so we're doing something right. In today's live stream, we're doing another episode of making decisions on the violin. If you're new to the channel, or you haven't watched any of this before, you probably don't know that in this series, I, professional violinist, take a look at a piece of music that I either haven't played before or haven't played in quite some time. In today's episode, we're doing a little bit of an easier piece. The last few videos we dedicated towards some really tricky stuff, including the Bruch Violin Concerto and a really difficult Bach sonata, the Andante movement of the A minor sonata. And so in today's video, we're going to do something easier. We're going to do what I would consider to be an intermediate piece, maybe intermediate to advanced. Pretty tricky, but definitely not hard by any professional or pre-college state. That being said, there's a lot to do with this piece, a lot of decisions to be made. And in making this video and in watching it, hopefully you can see some tips and learn some things about how I approach practice and how maybe you can approach practice as well. As violinists, even if you do have a teacher, you're going to spend almost all of your time with the instrument by yourself. So it's important to know what to do in the practice room, and this series is an effort to kind of show what that looks like and how we should be thinking about it. All right, audio's working now. We got real confirmation, so that's a relief. All right, let's dive in. We're going to start from the beginning. We're looking at the second violin part. The Bach double is a concerto that is written for two violins. So we have the first violin and the second violin. Even though they're called that, each part is basically exactly the same difficulty level, I would say. The second violin part just generally is a little bit lower, and it's the first one to enter, and it plays along with the second violins in the orchestra. So we're going to take a look at this second violin part and talk about fingerings and different decisions we make along the way. I've already written some out here because this is the second try of this live stream, but we'll go over it nonetheless. At the very beginning, we're starting in first position, and we're staying there for a little bit. Let's talk about that much to start. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are starting in first position. I've even written a little bit here. We're starting with a 0. That's our open D. We stay in first position for all of that. And then you see two different fingerings here, diverging choices. The suggested fingering from this edition is to shift, it's on the bottom, up to third position here, which would lead to all of these fingering choices. My preferred fingering is to stay in first. It's the top fingering route. And that would mean we're on a third finger here, obviously. And then the reason this fourth finger is in a circle is that's the marking that I like to use for whenever we use a stretched finger. So in this case, we're stretching our fourth finger to play that B flat. And then we would do an open string for the D, and all the expected fingerings from there. The bottom fingering, if we went to third position, we would be on a second finger on that D instead of an open string, and we would use the next open string, that next open D, to come down. I'm going to play through both of these options quickly to show you what each would look like. So the first is my preferred option, which is to stay in first position with a stretch. So you can see we're just staying in first, and that fourth finger is stretching up a half step from where it would normally go. whenever we do this kind of stretch, the way that I like to conceptualize it is confusing verbally, because the way we think about making our finger sharper or higher is by flattening it. And unfortunately, that's the same word as when we want to make a pitch lower, right? But that's how I'm physically conceptualizing it. In order to make the pitch higher, I'm flattening the finger. To do the opposite, if I wanted to make the pitch lower, or in other words, flatten the pitch, I would think about sharpening the finger. I would think about literally increasing the angle or the shape. In this case, in order to achieve this stretch, we're flattening the finger to make it higher pitch, to make it sharper. It's kind of annoying how that the verbiage works out, but it's a nice way for me personally to conceptualize it. Let's take a look at the bottom fingering option. This is the suggested fingering. I should note, though this is the suggested fingering, who is suggesting it? And the answer is not Bach, it's whoever the edition is written by, which I actually don't know. If you follow the link in the description to IMSLP, though, it's the same edition, and whatever it says there, that's the guy. That's whoever made this decision. So it's a little bit of a dated idea to do this shift here. It's totally fine, and I actually quite like it, but I just prefer my fingering. Let's take a look at what it looks like. We would shift to the G, and then we would have the G string sound for both of these, which is nice. And then we would use the open string to shift down. So you can see that both of these fingerings converge. Both of these fingerings converge right here on that last note, where the top fingering is already on the third finger, right? It's already in first position. The bottom fingering shifts down. Both of these fingerings, I think, are actually really great options. There's definitely other options you can do, but you shouldn't spend your whole life trying to find the best fingering. Just find one that feels good. And again, the general idea or rule of thumb with finding fingerings in Bach, or really in any music at all, in my opinion, is to find the simplest version of what fingering might work. So find the simplest fingering, or the most reliable fingering, in other words. And if you decide to diverge from that, if you decide to do extra shifts or whatever, you should have a very good reason. So here's an example. We can do this all in first, as you saw. We don't even need to do the stretch. We could do it all in first. But instead of going into first, he's deciding to shift. And that complicates it, but there's a good reason for it. And the reason is to have both of these bass notes being on the same string, on this bassy sound, and allowing you to use that second finger, which is just an easier finger to get a nice thick sound. So it's a good reason. And for that, it's a decent fingering, even though it does slightly overcomplicate it. Let's move on from there. This is the second line. So far, I'm basically doing exactly the fingerings that are suggested. That's the right word. Suggested here. The only difference is, you see I've written it here. I'm doing a fourth finger here that's not written explicitly, but I like it. And at this level of violin playing, what I would call intermediate, perhaps you're even an advanced beginner, or you're a little bit more advanced than that, maybe an advanced intermediate. Either way, at this stage of violin playing, I think it's important to figure out, or really specifically decide, if you're using open strings or fourth fingers. That's going to allow you to really, from the get-go, practice and instill the proper coordination with the bow. If you're not sure what you're using, then you're going to default to whatever's comfortable in the moment, which might be different minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, which means you're not going to be consistently reinforcing the same habit over and over again. So always be very clear with yourself in your practice at this stage of violin playing, whether you're using an open string or an open string substitution, which is any fingering that allows you to substitute the open string for a stopped note. So I'm writing it here. It's obvious to me, but I'm writing it so that you know that this is something that I think you should definitely be doing. So for example, this is why we do this. I'm actually not doing a fourth finger here. For comfort, I'm doing an open string here, and then I would do an open string here. And it makes a lot of sense to do that because now we are doing a string crossing on somewhat of a strong beat, right? On the and of that beat. We might call it the and of 3 and the and of 4. To do the fourth finger would have us changing to the D string from the G string on the E and of 3 and the of 4. It might sound a little confusing, so I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If we were to use the fourth finger, down, up, down, we're going to change on this up bow, which is not on any kind of natural emphasis. I'm emphasizing it right now so that you could see how if we did feel an impetus on it, how it would sound unnatural for this period of music. So what is natural is generally going to have emphases on strong beats or medium strong beats, which we might call the true beats of the measure, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and the midpoints of those beats, 1 and 2 and 3 and, as opposed to 1 E and 2 E and right? Not those in between. Those in between beats are a little bit more complicated for our coordination, and whenever we're dealing with string crossings, we want to make it, just like with fingerings, as simple as possible. If we're changing on those E and Us, it's a little bit less simple in my opinion. So those open strings allow us to do it on those, what we would call medium strong beats. We don't have any shifts, and yet it's important to make these fingering choices. This is a perfect example of this concept in its natural habitat. The rest of that is just in first position and is all going to be on the A string with no string crossing, so there's nothing complicated there. Here we find our first real bowing question. If we don't think about it at all, and we just play it exactly as written, we're going to be at the tip here, and then we'll run out of bow, right, for the second half note. So something needs to happen. We have two options, in my opinion. Again, there's always more than that, but there's the two most obvious options, and that's a great place to start. We can either hook in so that we end up on an up bow here, which would translate to an up bow here if we do the as it comes bowing after the fact. And then do the same thing here, where we do an up essentially here. Or we can do as written with a sense of moving during this from the tip to, we might say, the mid. So in the simplest bowing marking, where we're doing it as it comes, we have the more complicated bowing technique, which is where we're making up bow over the course of equal notes. It's kind of confusing. So we have equal notes, in this case 16th notes. And we need to, during the course of those down ups that should be relatively equal, we need to be unequal with our bow so that we travel. So we can practice this on scales. We can practice this outside of the repertoire. Let's do it on an open string for now, where we're doing consistent notes. You can probably already hear the issue with this. I'm a professional violinist. I literally do this for a living. And when I try to do this technique where I'm traveling during equal notes, you can probably hear that it's not quite sounding equal. It's almost like you can hear more of the up bows. This is less obvious away from an open string when you're doing a proper thing. It's a little less obvious that we have all these up bows that are a little stronger, but getting as close to even on the open strings is going to give you the best chance of being seamless on the actual finger notes. That being said, the problem arises, the problem exists, and even though it's the simplest bowing to write, where we're just doing it as it comes, it's the most complicated technique. This technique of traveling into different parts of your bow while playing small notes and trying to maintain evenness is really challenging. So I think the alternative, while it's actually requiring us to change the bowing and do something specific, is actually simpler. So we're on a down bow here, and we do a little down bow. I would prefer actually not to write it as a slur so that we don't think of it as a slur, because it's really a rearticulation. And something we can add in is almost feeling like there's a little bit of space after that tied note. So what that might look like is and we're doing the same thing on the other side. That's an exaggeration. I put a little more space there than I might do in reality. But the same idea applies here. Up, up. Another way you could write this, if you're comfortable, is you can write the slur, and then you can write a little dot. But to me, it's just the simplest to write a little explicit bowing. And if we do this, we end up where we play these at the tip, and then we play these in the middle. So with that, we get all of the 16th notes in each batch to be equivalent. So the job should be done, right? All these are going to feel really equivalent pretty easily, and all of these are going to feel pretty equivalent. Job's not done, though, because we have to really think about how we have the tip here and we have the mid here, right? So we just need to make sure that, yes, they're even within themselves, but that they're also relatively even across themselves. So from one section to the other, making sure that our tip doesn't sound weaker. I see here, sounds more natural phrasing-wise as well. Yeah, I agree to do... For me, that does sound a little bit more natural because we're having these larger gestures, these larger constructions. You can almost feel like you're doing this more simple idea of all of this is kind of just a down bow. And then all of this is kind of just part of an up bow. I like to do things like that where I conceptualize or group as much of the music as possible. If you're learning this piece of music or something comparable in difficulty or that has the same kind of issues, I highly recommend that you take a look at Wolfart's Etude book number 2. It deals with a lot of different bowing techniques and coordination issues between primarily first and third position. In fact, if we take a look really quickly at this Etude number 38 is a perfect example of grouping notes in bigger sections. It's really, really wonderful, and I actually already made a video. I'm making videos about all of these etudes individually, so if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. Etude number 38. It's very, very useful for creating this idea of thinking in groups, thinking in bigger sections. Let's go back to the Bach. So when we come out of this, we're going from the second line. I'm pretty sure I did almost exactly what's written here. I'm doing a lot of this from what just feels comfortable in the moment. Yeah, another example or another spot where we should be very specific is we're doing a fourth finger here, and then we're going to do an open string. Once again, it's that same idea of we want to have the coordination of our string crossing make a lot of sense. So we're going 4, 3, right on that fourth beat is where we're changing to the A string. And that is just going to make it a lot easier to sound clean. If we use the fourth finger, we're going to change on the E, 4 E, and that's just going to be a little bit bulky in my opinion. So we'll use the open string instead. Otherwise, the fingering staying in first is really nice there. Let's go from that third line. And we have the same issue here that we had before, right? We can use either solution. Since we're using one the first time, we should use it again. This way, we don't have to practice that again, right? We can just use the same mechanics we built in one spot and use it in the next. So down, down, up, up, to keep us really comfortable. I'm going to go from this measure here. All right, I don't love that fingering though. I like the bowing, but let's take a look at the fingering and see if we can come up with something else. It's suggesting that we shift on to that D there and then shift back down here. And if you're not new to the channel, you probably already know our shifting rules. We talk a lot about it in these videos because it comes up a lot. In general, when you're deciding where you should put a shift, you should either put it after a long note where you have a little bit more time, or after a rest, after an open string, or you're looking for strong beats and half steps. Those are generally our rules of thumb for deciding on shifts. If we take a look, whenever a shift feels really uncomfortable or not proper, it most likely is disobeying some of those rules. So let's take a look at this first one here. Shifting onto that D, let's see, is there a half step? There's no half step. That's a whole step between C natural and D. Is it after a long note? No, it's after that 16th note, C natural, which is very fast. Is it on a strong beat? Kind of. It's on the and of 3, so it's not necessarily a weak beat. We call those medium strong beats, right? So it's kind of obeying that rule. Let's see where we can find another opportunity to shift that's going to obey more of our rules and therefore most likely going to be more comfortable. I'm going to play through a few options, just feeling it out. This is the kind of investigative part of practice. Well, that's the worst one so far. I used a fourth finger like 2 times in a row. I didn't like that. Ooh, I like that. So we're taking advantage of a very strong version of one of these rules, which is to shift after a long note. If there's not an abundance of these options, if there isn't a half step and a strong beat and a long note, then you just have to kind of find one of them. In this case, we have our long note, so it's very easy to shift after the long note because we have time to prepare mentally. So we're on a third finger here. And I like the idea of shifting to a first finger here. So shifting up a whole step with our hand into a new position, or a half step rather. Our first finger, we think about where our first finger is. Oh no, it's a whole step because our first finger's on a B flat here, right? We're not playing it, but it's there. It's moving up a whole step to that C natural. Let's take a look at what that would look like. Even simpler, a way to think about this would be to think about where your second finger is Again, we're not playing the second finger, but thinking about how your second finger is already on that C natural and just literally replacing it with one. I'm not playing the C natural, but I have it down. I'm just thinking about replacing it with one. If we do that, we end up in second position for that. And when we look at the next section, if we're in second position, we're on a second finger here on the D. And then look, that's a half step and it's a quasi strong beat. We have the and of 3. So that's 2 of our rules. And that's great. That's going to make for a really comfortable fingering. We can prove that by doing it and seeing if it feels comfortable. Feels pretty comfortable to me. Now, if you feel uncomfortable with second position, it might not be as comfortable for you, but it's something that I still encourage you to try. Positions that are uncomfortable are just usually positions that are unfamiliar. If you're uncomfortable with second position, or any position for that matter, I encourage you to practice scales in that position. So practicing any scale in second position and committing to second position, not shifting, and just doing 1 to 2 octave scales, taking advantage of that position and playing them across the strings. It's a great way to build familiarity with different positions. We're going to go from that line moving on. This is the 4th line. Okay, a lot of things happening here. It's all basic up until the end of that line. I see. So the suggested fingering is not as bad as I thought. I was just not playing what they intended. So it's suggesting to use this half step to shift up to third and then stay there and then not go down until that second finger. Let's take a look at what that feels like. Not terrible. An alternative would be to just stay in position. Remember, the name of the game, in my opinion, is simplicity, and if you're going to change, there should be a good reason. I don't know if there's a good enough reason to go into third here. I guess you're avoiding some open strings and whatnot. We can just do that fingering. I don't hate it so much. Ooh. Okay, I like it. We're going to use that suggested fingering. So we're shifting back up to third position here. Does it fulfill our requirements for choosing a fingering? It's on a strong beat, so there's one. It's not on a half step or after a long note, but it's not a particularly fast note. We're just playing eighth notes, so that's not necessarily a problem. And then, while it's not a half step, it is kind of a finger replacement, which is even better than a half step in a lot of ways. So we have that third finger that we're playing before it on the D, and then we're just going to put our first finger right there, right where that third finger is. Of course, we're not going to do it in this grotesque way where I'm changing the shape of my hand. We're going to actually properly shift. All right. So at this point, I would like to note that 16th notes throughout this, you might notice I'm playing very on the string. My interpretation is that that's going to be a nice sound, just the appropriate stroke. Coming up with your texture and general stroke for the entire piece is definitely important. I think in general we're going to play our 16 notes on the string with a very clear détaché stroke. And then all of our 8th notes we're going to have a little bit of separation. They don't have to be off the string. That's, in fact, going to sound a little bit out of style, I think. And I don't think they should be very long. We want them to be very clear. We're thinking about how this sounds in an orchestra. We're looking for cleanliness and elegance. If there's any questions, by the way, we on this channel have a very small community, which is not great for me, but it is great for you all because it means that if and when you guys post anything in the chat, there's a very high chance that I actually read it and respond because I don't have a lot to get through. And I'm happy to answer any questions about technique or anything related to this especially that you might have along the way. I can only do my best in addressing concerns that I perceive or difficulties that I perceive might exist in this piece of music for violinists of various levels. With that, no questions, extremely clear. Awesome. Love to hear that. We're going to move on here and continue after that shift that we just talked about. And very detailed on your decision. Thank you. I try to be. We're going to go right from this mezzo forte here and move on. So, in the past, throughout this, I almost called it an etude. Throughout this piece, we've been making, after these half notes, we've been making the decision to do this, not slur, but this second bow, right? The down, down, or the up, up, in order to maintain that part of the bow, help with bow distribution. How come we're not doing it here? Why do I think we don't need the down, down here? And while it is complicated to do this technique that we've talked about, where we're doing these détaché strokes, where we're moving throughout the bow from the middle to the tip or vice versa, the reason we're doing it is because it's actually easier to do that technique where we're moving around the bow when we have more time. The more notes that we have, the less we need to move with any individual one, which means the less chance we have of making anything stick out unnecessarily. My only request is that maybe do this in the future on the other two Bach concerti. Interesting. Yeah, those are definitely a lot less famous. In fact, I don't think I've ever played those. So maybe we'll take a look at them in the future. That being said, let's move on with this idea. So here from the mezzo forte, yeah, we're at the tip, but now we have how many beats to get all the way back to the middle? We got this beat here, this beat, this beat. That's 4, 5 beats to travel from where we end up at the tip to where it's comfortable for the next note. So that's a lot easier to travel in. Oops. And here I am. I'm talking about how we don't need to do the down down, and yet I wrote it in, so that's confusing. We don't need the down down, so we're going to do an up bow here, unlike we've done in the past. I think for convenience, I'll do a little up bow here. I didn't do it just now. A little up bow just so we end the phrase on a nice down bow. Same thing. 1, 4, 3, 4. Let's do that again. In terms of musicality and sensibility in Baroque music especially, when we're dealing with these harmonies, we're generally trying to find that tension and that release. So when we have these cadences, in this case, that C sharp to the D, is representing that kind of dominant, that A to that D potentially. I'd have to see the score to be absolutely certain. But whenever we have this kind of cadence, it's not that we're going to the D minor with strength. So it wouldn't be... We wouldn't want to smack that usually. Usually you would want to come away from it. That being said, depending on the ensemble or what happens next, this is where score study comes into play. Sometimes having a conductor comes into play. We can make other decisions that are a little bit more elaborate. But yeah, so we don't want to smack that when we get there. All right, after that, up until now, everything we've talked about has been the violin tutti part, which is pretty incredible. Even though it's equally as difficult as the solo part, it isn't a solo. You're playing that with the entire second violin section, in theory, if you're performing this. Now, after this rehearsal letter A, we're finally getting into the solo part. So this means that no other violinists, aside from you, are playing this exact part. Okay, I don't think I did very many of the suggested fingerings here, so let's see what feels natural to me, what decisions I'm making, and why I'm diverging, and why I think it works. Because what I played did feel comfortable to me. Off the bat, we're in first position, and we're just staying there. So the first measure is very clear. Whenever we have this figure, which we're going to have a few times in this piece, where we're leaping, these are, what are they, tenths? Big intervals. Whatever these bottom notes are, we want those to be on the same string as each other. And whatever the top notes are, we want them to be on the same strings as each other, just to help us keep the timbre very consistent. So in this case, we're on the D string for the bottom notes, and on the E string for the top notes if we're in first position. And if we follow the fingering here, it's going to abide by that logic. We're on a first finger here in first position, and then we shift up to a fourth finger. So that we're on the E string for these, and we're on the A string for these, because we have the open A. In theory, if you wanted to keep all three of these, you would need to play the previous ones on the D string instead, which is definitely possible. And that might be a good enough reason to complicate the fingering. Let's see what that would look like. So instead of staying in first, we would need to shift earlier. Which could work. The comfortablest is what I was going to say. The most comfortable fingering, if we wanted to play that B flat, if we wanted this B flat to be on a third finger, do we? Then the most comfortable fingering would be to play this note, to shift to it using the open string D to shift to a fourth finger here. But then it's like you're always making a trade-off, because now this is no longer on the E string, and I feel like this is all related. But you do get this on the D string. So it's a question of what you think is more important. To me, when you're deciding to do a fingering that's more complicated, less simple and reliable, then you got to have a really good reason. And though this is a reason, I don't know that it's a very good one. So I would just first position. Just do the original fingering we talked about, which has us shifting, staying in third, until the open string here. Using this open string to come down. I believe, let's see. So shifting up. Yeah. And we're just in position there. Once again, I think it's important to determine where you're using open strings and where not at this level, so that you have really consistent choices that help you build up good repetitions for your coordination. So fourth finger here, this gets us used to this concept of 3 notes, or not 3 notes, 4 notes, 4 notes on the same string. And then we have 4 notes on the same string, right? That's our little pattern here that we have going. If we use the open string, it would break that pattern. And then here, we have to do something. I actually quite like the suggested fingering here. It's taking, it's breaking our rules, unfortunately, but we have to do something. We have to, sometimes our rules are broken, and our rules are how we create convenient fingerings. They're not how we create every fingering. Sometimes music is not convenient, especially like this. Keep up the great work. Thank you. I'm trying. I don't know if it's great, but it definitely is work. So we're shifting here if we do this suggested fingering, which is breaking a lot of our rules. We're no longer shifting on a strong beat. We're shifting on the one E, the E of the beat. We're not shifting on a half step, and we're not shifting after a long note. So we're breaking rules, and yet feels pretty comfortable. I wonder if there's another solution. Any ideas for this that would be more convenient? It's just kind of an awkward spot. So my current, it's a shift here. Yeah. I guess the only other option that I think is reasonable here, and this is, though it doesn't require us to shift, in my opinion it makes it more complicated, is where we do first position here. I'm going to erase some of this for clarity. We're doing first position here, so we're on a third finger, right? And then instead of doing a second finger like is normal for the C sharp, we're going to do a low 3. We're going to do it. I'm probably not going to do this, but this is the option. We'll do a low 3, which means that we can place our second finger here, first finger here, and then an open. After the open, we can shift to third position. Let's see what that looks like in uber slow-mo. We'll go right from here. So we have to place that third finger low right there. Kind of uncomfortable. It puts us into a half position, and for a lot of people, myself included, half positions are a little bit uncomfortable, and I just prefer to I find shifting to third position to be easier than contorting my hand and doing a half position. So that's definitely an option. We'll leave it on the top so I don't have to rewrite it, but the alternative is to shift from the second finger up to fourth finger, and then in either fingering we're converging right here on the second beat. Both fingers are converging right there, where we're going to be on a third position by that point. Regardless of the fingering, how do we get out of it? Are we going to shift back down like it's suggested? I'm going to start from the beginning of that line. So we can stay in position, or we can shift down and use the open A. Whatever we do, I don't like this suggestion here, which is to shift down, right? And then shift right back up. That seems clunky to me. I think we either stay up or we shift down and stay down. So if we stay up, it looks like this. I don't hate it. If we go down, it looks like this. So we would end up playing that F natural on the E string. I struggled a lot with this piece. Your suggestions are helpful. Good. Well, not good that you struggled with this piece, but good that my suggestions are helpful. Yeah, a lot of this piece is has these little sneaky challenges, and a lot of it has to do with these fingering choices. Again, I think that making the simplest choices is often going to be the best option. For my comfort, I think I prefer to just stay up for this. So we're just not doing the suggested fingering, just staying in third position, and then we're already in third position for this. So we can put it in parentheses or we can erase it. Let's go from that line. This is like the best part, I think, of this concerto for the second violin part. It's really cool. And I think this is one of those spots where I'm not picking a convenient fingering. I'm picking a fingering that is a little bit more complicated, but allows me to really show these voicings. So we have a very clear change here in voices from essentially two important voices. We have the bass line. We have this kind of alto, which is not super important. And then we have the soprano line, you might call it, right? And I'm going to do my best to be on the G string for as much of the bass line as possible. This is a more modern sensibility, perhaps, something that maybe you wouldn't have seen people doing, or maybe historically practiced violinists won't do, but I'll be honest, I don't care much about that stuff. Don't hate on that. But I think that, you know, just do what you feel is important or sounds good. Okay, we're getting out in the weeds here now. I don't have anything against historically informed performance. In fact, I think it's important, but I don't think that everybody needs to do it. That's my stance. I think that Bach is one of those beautiful composers that you can really do so much with it, and you can bring it into whatever your style as a violinist is. I do think there's limitations, and you can't go off the deep end where you're doing crazy things, but I think you can do things that, you know, they weren't necessarily capable of doing or didn't do in his time. We've, you know, since invented chin rests, for example, and shoulder rests, things that allow us to shift a lot easier. So I'm not doing an open string, for example. I'm in third position, and I'm going to stay there and use a nice second finger. And a lot of people might say I'm going to use too fat of a vibrato. But I want that really thick sound. Really create this new voice here. And I'm using this. This is, yeah, Bach 2 violin. Yes, this is the Bach double. We're looking at the second violin part here. You can find a link to the music in the description below. Hopefully it works for everybody. I know it certainly works in the United States and Canada, I believe. So after this second finger on the D, we're going to shift down. Our rules of shifting again. We're going to shift after a long note. That's a big rule of shifting. So that's in line with that, and therefore it's most likely going to be comfortable. And sure enough, it is. We stay in first position there, and then the next notes are going to be in first position as well for this bass line. Anything else to note about this? I'm doing a hooked bowing here. Down, up, down. I'm doing it primarily so that the ties end up on a down bow, because for me the phrase just feels really good, And a lot of decisions are made because it feels good. I think that's it's not an academic reason to do something, but it's a good reason. Part of the reason we play violin is because it feels good to make beautiful music. And the two senses, right? We have a bunch of senses in life that we experience. We have, sense of sight, sense of touch, hearing, taste, smell. The two most important senses on the violin are obviously our ear, hearing, and the second is our feeling, how something feels. And we're trying to connect those two senses constantly. So yeah, it is important for something to feel good. And so that's my reason here. We're doing... So it's pretty much as it comes, except every time we have a 16th note after one of these long notes, I'm doing a little down bow, except for this time. Yeah, and then let's see. All this just feels good in first position. Then open A, and then second, third finger, right? That's all on the D string. Once again, we have voices presenting themselves. These ones are closer together, but they're still different voices. It's a lot of what we feel in Bach is the polyphony in these melodies, the multiple voices inside of a melody. Fingering here is great. The only thing I would add is I would add a little circle around the second finger just to indicate that it's a stretch, or in this case a compression, and not actually a shift. It's not taking us out of position. It's just a low 2 presenting itself as a B natural in first position. And then after that, I like to do ups here. Again, I like these ties, these strong ties over the beat that are not on the beat, that are interjecting on these ands. I like to have them really strong, and what feels natural to me is having them manifest on down bows. So from the beginning of that line, I should mention another one of these things is, again, we're just going to use a fourth finger here, and it's important to note so that we build up that good repetition and we can start to build our coordination on these string crossings already off the get-go. Seems like a little thing, but it's important. And for example, I just played it as an open string when I really want to play it as a fourth finger, so I'm not benefiting from consistent repetitions. Let's see, bowing here is everything. Ooh, perhaps a little complicated, but I like it. So we're doing it as it comes, the bowing. Fingering is pretty much in first position what you'd expect. The only thing is that we've been talking a lot about choosing a fourth finger substitute for an open string or an open string depending on the simplicity of coordination for our string crossings. In other words, using a fourth finger when it allows us to do a string crossing on a strong beat, using an open string when it doesn't. So in theory, to follow that rule, we'd use an open string here so that we'd have a string crossing on the and of 4. Because if we used a fourth finger, string crossing would be on the 4E, the E of 4, right? However, this is a new part of the phrase, right? This is representative of this phrase we've seen before. And that phrase starts on the E. So it shouldn't merge with the rest. It should poke out. And so for that reason, I would use a fourth finger. So there's different considerations for these choices. And like I said, it's not telling you whether or not you need to shift. It's all about coordination, and yet it's important. So here we're going to use that fourth finger to really separate that, get that G string sound for just those 3 notes. We're going right from the poco dim measure here. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable section in the entire piece. The fingerings here are questionable. Let's see. So from B, we're in first position, and we're just in first position for that whole thing. It's pretty comfortable. But then we get here. And what do we do? What do we do here? I'm seriously asking. I don't know if I have the answers, at least not yet. All I know is that I'm not sure about what I'm looking at in terms of this suggested finger. I'm not sure if I love it. Let's look for inspiration back into the analogous spot the other time we do this same concept, which is right here, right after A, the first solo entrance. Let's see how we felt about it then to give us some perspective on the new section. So we have this idea of these 4 notes in blue, 4 notes in red. These 2 voices. Let's see where that is here. We got these 4 notes in blue, 4 notes in red, and again we have 4 notes in blue, then we have the 4 notes in red. So it stands true, and in theory, what we did before is we had the same string for each of those colors. And I like that. We run into a problem though, because if we do this fingering, where we stay on the D string, if we stay on the D string for that A, now we have to do a quick shift. It is a finger replacement, so it's not the worst shift. It's just a little bit uncomfortable. So we're in one of those battles where we have to choose between a fingering of convenience versus a fingering of musicality. And unfortunately, they are at odds with each other in this particular section. If we do the convenience fingering where we use the open string here, if we use this open string, we're really betraying our idea of keeping the timbre of those or the voice of those consistent. However, if we don't use the open string and we use the second finger, for example, now we're creating a little bit of difficulty with that shift. It's rather inconvenient, you might say. So let's see if we can keep those on the D string, but find perhaps a different fingering than going all the way down to first. Yeah, I think that whether or not you can use the convenient fingering or you shouldn't depends a lot on your performance tempo. At a fast tempo, I don't think the open A will really matter all that much, but at a more modest tempo, I think it'll be important to remove. And we can do the fingering suggested. It's one big shift to that 4th finger to first position, then we're staying there. Or we can do incremental shifts. So an alternative would be going to 3rd finger here. See. And then going to 3rd finger on the D over here as well. So using that figure as an opportunity to shift, and we're creating a pattern, which is always nice. So I like it because it's the same physical pattern each block. We have 3rd finger, 3rd finger, 3rd finger, And that's the nice thing about that, is that we do have a pattern. The unfortunate thing is that we're breaking a lot of our rules. We're not shifting on a strong beat. We're not shifting on a half step. And we're not shifting after a long note. And as a result, it's rather uncomfortable. But because it is a pattern, you only need to really perfect one of them, and the skill set carries over to the rest. So it does cut a lot of your practice. It's one of those trade-offs. So whether you do the convenient fingering or the inconvenient fingering is up to you. I think, for me personally, I prefer... Ooh. I think I prefer the simple fingering. I don't know. I think I prefer the complicated fingering. If we do the simple fingering that's written on top, I should note that you're either going to have to do 3-2 here with a 1-1, or you'll have to do a 4-3 with a 2-1. Something to allow you to play this interval, that tritone there. I think the complicated fingering will get comfortable over time, so I'm going to commit to it and try it for you again. I'm going to write it bigger so I can see it. There's all these markings. So we're going to do third finger and third finger. Might as well write it here as well so we can see the pattern truly. We'll zoom in for this. At the modest tempo, it's definitely pretty easy for me. Picking it up would take a little bit more practice. Once again, at the end of this phrase, at the end of this measure, or line rather, we have a lot of beats to get away from where this quarter note takes us. It takes us close to the tip, but we have enough beats to where that's not really a problem. So we don't need to do the second down bow. We can just do as it comes. Yeah, we're going to stop there today. That was a lot of Bach double violin concerto. We only actually did one page, but there's a lot of interesting concepts, and I think it's worth spending time on. If you enjoy this kind of content, please leave a like and please subscribe so you don't miss it in the future. I will continue on with this piece next week on next week's live stream, most likely around the same time as today. Hopefully, I'll see some of you guys back here. In the meantime, make sure you yourself get yourself a copy and practice what we went over today, and maybe look a little bit ahead so that you're ready for the second page and beyond next week in the live stream. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy practicing.